Welcome to Life Story 999. Today's story is a moving tale about how a single act of kindness can unravel into unexpected events, ultimately revealing the power of compassion and forgiveness. Our story follows a young man named Jordan, who helps an elderly neighbor with a simple favor, only to face surprising accusations the next day. How will he prove his innocence? And what lesson awaits them both? Stick around for the full story. If you enjoy heartfelt stories, please like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more uplifting tales. Jordan, a high school senior known for his diligence, always prioritized his family. His days were filled with helping his mother with chores and caring for his younger siblings. One warm afternoon, on his way back from school, Jordan noticed Mrs. Lawson, an elderly woman from his neighborhood, struggling on her front porch with her TV remote, frustration evident on her face. The sight stirred something within him. He couldn't just walk by. Without a second thought, Jordan approached her. "Need some help, Mrs. Lawson?" he asked, offering a warm smile. Mrs. Lawson, a little surprised yet relieved, accepted his offer. She explained how her TV wasn't responding, and she had no idea how to fix it. Jordan, who had a knack for electronics, nodded and reassured her. He fiddled with the remote, pressing a few buttons and adjusting the batteries. Within minutes, the TV sprang to life. Mrs. Lawson's face lit up with gratitude. As they waited for the channels to change, they began to chat. Mrs. Lawson shared that she had once been a schoolteacher, spending over 30 years shaping young minds at the local elementary school. She spoke of her students, her stories carrying a sense of nostalgia, and Jordan listened intently, fascinated by the passion she had for teaching. He could almost picture her classroom, her telling stories to curious children, guiding them with patience and wisdom. It was rare for Jordan to see things from the perspective of an educator, and her stories made him see school life in a different light. Their conversation meandered from her years as a teacher to her life now, how she lived alone, and spent her time tending to her garden or reading. Jordan felt a sense of warmth and connection. Fixing the TV had taken him only a few minutes, but their conversation stretched well beyond that. Mrs. Lawson, grateful for the help, offered Jordan a glass of lemonade, which he accepted. They sat on the porch, sipping lemonade, enjoying the pleasant afternoon. As Jordan finally got up to leave, Mrs. Lawson thanked him once more, her eyes shining with appreciation. "You're a good boy, Jordan. It's young people like you that give me hope for the future," she said. Jordan smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment that went beyond the simple act of fixing a TV. He waved goodbye and headed home, unaware that this small act of kindness would lead to a series of events that would soon challenge him and transform his life in ways he never could have imagined. That evening, as Jordan walked home, he felt lighter, as if he had gained something far more valuable than what he had given. It was a fleeting moment, but it resonated. The power of kindness, the bond of shared stories, and the unexpected connections that could arise from simply stopping to help. Little did Jordan know that this was just the beginning of an extraordinary journey. The following morning, Jordan's routine was shattered by the sharp sound of sirens. Jolted awake, he rushed to the window, his heart pounding, only to see two police cars parked in front of his house. A cold chill ran down his spine when he spotted Mrs. Lawson standing beside the officers, her expression tense and uneasy. The sight left Jordan baffled. What could possibly have happened to bring the police to his door, and why was Mrs. Lawson there? Curiosity turned into growing concern, and Jordan stepped outside, cautiously approaching the scene. His mother joined him, her face marked by a mixture of confusion and worry. As they stepped closer, an officer turned to them, and Mrs. Lawson quickly pointed towards Jordan. "That's him," she said, her voice carrying an edge of uncertainty. Jordan's stomach tightened with dread. "Mrs. Lawson," Jordan began, but before he could say more, she interrupted, her voice breaking slightly. "Jordan, I'm so sorry, but my wallet has gone missing. The last time I saw it, it was before you helped me yesterday. I need to know if you saw it or if something happened to it. Jordan felt his heart sink as the officer's gaze fell upon him, suspicion evident in his eyes. He glanced over at Mrs. Lawson, her face a mix of regret and accusation. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "I didn't take your wallet, Mrs. Lawson," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I swear I would never do something like that." Mrs. Lawson shook her head, tears welling up. "I don't want to believe it either, Jordan. You seemed like such a nice young man, but I can't ignore the fact that it went missing right after you were there." Her words hit him like a blow, each one more painful than the last. Jordan's mother stepped forward, her expression resolute. "This must be a misunderstanding," she said firmly, her voice unwavering. "My son would never steal from anyone. He has always been honest and kind." The officers exchanged glances, their expressions giving nothing away. "I'm afraid we have to conduct a search," one of the officers said, his tone professional but lacking sympathy. Jordan felt a wave of humiliation wash over him as the officer's words registered. He could already see his neighbors gathering, their eyes fixed on the scene unfolding in his front yard. The whispers started, curious, judgmental, skeptical. With a nod from Jordan's mother, the officers began their search, moving through their home as Jordan, his mother, and Mrs. Lawson stood outside. Jordan could feel the eyes of the entire neighborhood on him, each minute feeling like an eternity. His mother's hand rested on his shoulder, her silent support the only thing keeping him from breaking under the weight of it all. Mrs. Lawson stood a few feet away, her arms wrapped around herself, her expression torn between doubt and hope that she was mistaken. Jordan wanted to tell her again that he was innocent, but the words felt useless. Instead, he stood quietly, his heart aching with a mix of disbelief and betrayal. The minutes stretched on, each one adding to the knot in Jordan's stomach. Finally, the officers emerged from the house, empty-handed. One of them approached Mrs. Lawson. "We didn't find anything, ma'am. We'll continue to investigate, but there's no sign of the wallet here." Mrs. Lawson's face fell, her eyes locking onto Jordan's. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The officers exchanged a few more words with her before returning to their cars, leaving Jordan, his mother, and Mrs. Lawson standing in an awkward silence. I'm so sorry, Jordan," Mrs. Lawson finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked at him, her eyes filled with regret. "I didn't want to believe it, but I was scared. I didn't know what else to do." Jordan swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I understand, Mrs. Lawson," he managed, though the hurt was clear in his voice. "I just wish you'd trusted me." Mrs. Lawson nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. She turned and walked away, her steps slow and heavy, as if each one carried the weight of her guilt. Jordan watched her go, the sting of her suspicion still fresh. His mother pulled him into a hug, her arms wrapping around him protectively. "We know the truth, Jordan," she whispered. "That's all that matters." But as Jordan looked around, seeing the eyes of his neighbor still watching, he couldn't help but feel the doubt that lingered in the air. He knew that this incident would not be easily forgotten, and the whispers would not quickly fade. The weight of being falsely accused pressed down on him, a heavy reminder of how quickly trust could be shattered. That evening, as Jordan sat with his siblings, trying to focus on their homework, he felt the burden of the day's events pressing on him. His younger brother, Tyler, looked up at him, his eyes wide with worry. "Did you really take it, Jordan?" he asked innocently, not understanding the gravity of the question. Jordan shook his head, forcing a smile. "No, Tyler, I didn't take anything. Sometimes people make mistakes, but I promise you, I'm not one of those people." Tyler nodded, seeming satisfied, but Jordan could still feel the doubt lingering in the back of his own mind. How could something as simple as helping a neighbor turn into this nightmare? As the night wore on, Jordan found himself replaying every moment of his encounter with Mrs. Lawson, searching for anything, that might explain what had happened to her wallet. But no matter how much he thought about it, He couldn't find an answer. All he knew was that he hadn't taken it, and yet he was the one left to face the consequences. Little did Jordan know, the truth would soon come to light in the most unexpected way. But until then, he had to find a way to endure the suspicion and the stares, and to hold on to the belief that his integrity would eventually speak for itself. Word of the incident spread quickly through the neighborhood, and the reactions were mixed. Some residents couldn't help but whisper among themselves, casting suspicious glances whenever Jordan passed by. Doubts about his innocence circulated, and the incident became the talk of the community. Mrs. Peterson, who lived 2 doors down, voiced her doubts openly. "I always thought Jordan was a good kid, but you never really know, do you?" she remarked to her neighbor, shaking her head as they watched him walk to school. Her words carried a weight that made Jordan feel like he was constantly under a microscope. Yet, amidst the whispers of doubt, there were also those who believed in him unwaveringly. Mr. Gomez, a retired mechanic who had known Jordan since he was a child, was one of his strongest supporters. "That boy wouldn't hurt a fly," Mr. Gomez insisted to anyone who would listen. "I've seen him grow up. He's always been respectful and willing to help anyone in need. This has to be some kind of mistake." His words were echoed by others who had experienced Jordan's kindness firsthand. Neighbors who had seen him mow lawns, carry groceries, and lend a helping hand stood by him, refusing to believe he could do something dishonest. Jordan's friends rallied around him too. They knew him better than anyone else, and the idea of him stealing was simply out of the question. Marcus, his best friend, was especially vocal. "There's no way Jordan did this," Marcus declared to their classmates. "He's the most honest person I know." Despite the support, Jordan couldn't help but notice the sideways glances and hushed conversations that stopped whenever he entered a room. The incident had cast a shadow over him, one that seemed to follow him everywhere. Meanwhile, Mrs. Lawson remained conflicted. The doubt gnawed at her, despite the fact that no evidence had been found in Jordan's home. She had always thought of herself as a good judge of character, and Jordan had seemed like such a kind young man. But her missing wallet was an undeniable fact, and the timing was too much of a coincidence for her to simply dismiss. She avoided Jordan whenever she saw him in the neighborhood, her heart heavy with uncertainty. It pained her to think that she might have been wrong about him, but the fear of being deceived was stronger. The tension in the neighborhood was palpable. It was as if an invisible line had been drawn. Those who believed in Jordan's innocence on one side, and those who doubted him on the other. The once tight-knit community felt divided, the incident creating an atmosphere of mistrust. Jordan could feel the weight of the accusations bearing down on him, even from those who didn't say anything openly. The worst part was the way it affected his family. His mother held her head high, but Jordan could see the strain in her eyes, the way her smile faltered when they passed by neighbors who looked away instead of greeting them. One day, as Jordan walked home from school, he noticed Mr. Gomez waiting on his porch. The old mechanic waved him over, and Jordan hesitated for a moment before crossing the street. "How are you holding up, kid?" Mr. Gomez asked, his voice kind but filled with concern. Jordan shrugged, trying to appear unaffected. "I'm okay, Mr. Gomez. Just trying to get through it." Mr. Gomez patted him on the shoulder. "You keep your head up, you hear? The truth always comes out in the end." Jordan nodded, grateful for the support, though he couldn't help but wonder when the truth would finally reveal itself. Until then, all he could do was endure the stares, the whispers, and the uncertainty. He had to believe that his actions would speak louder than the accusations, and that in time, his integrity would shine through. The incident had shaken his sense of security, but it had also shown him who truly believed in him. And for that, he was thankful. Days passed, and the tension in the neighborhood remained high as the police continued their investigation. Jordan did his best to carry on with his daily routine, but the stares and whispers from some neighbors made it difficult. Each day felt like a trial, his integrity questioned by people who had once greeted him warmly. Despite the unwavering support of his mother, Mr. Gomez, and his friends, the burden weighed heavily on him. It seemed as though nothing could change the narrative that had formed around him. One evening, As Jordan sat at the kitchen table helping his younger brother, Alex, with his math homework, something unexpected happened. Alex, who had taken a break from studying, was scrolling through his favorite social media app when he suddenly gasped. "Jordan, look at this," he exclaimed, his eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and excitement. Jordan leaned over to look at Alex's phone. On the screen was a video that had been posted by a neighborhood kid, Kevin, a boy known for getting into trouble. In the video, Kevin was showing off a wallet, bragging loudly about how he had taken it from an old lady. Jordan's heart began to race as he recognized the wallet. It was Mrs. Lawson's. The same wallet that had thrown his life into turmoil was now in Kevin's hands, flaunted as if it were a trophy. "Alex, where did you find this?" Jordan asked, his voice trembling. Alex looked up at him, still stunned. "It just showed up in my feed," he replied. Jordan knew this was it. This was the evidence that could clear his name and put an end to the nightmare he had been living. Without wasting another moment, he called out to his mother, who came rushing into the room, concern etched across her face. "Mom, look at this," Jordan said, showing her the video. She watched in silence, her expression shifting from confusion to realization, and then to relief. Tears welled up in her eyes as she hugged Jordan tightly. "We need to take this to the police right away," she said, her voice thick with emotion. The drive to the police station felt like a blur. Jordan clutched Alex's phone in his hands, his fingers trembling slightly. He could hardly believe that after days of feeling helpless, the answer had been right there, waiting to be found. When they arrived at the station, Officer Daniels, who had been involved in the search of their home, greeted them. Jordan's mother wasted no time in explaining what they had found. Officer Daniels watched the video carefully, his brows furrowing as Kevin's face appeared on the screen, bragging about the wallet. He nodded, then looked at Jordan. "This changes everything," he said. "We'll need to follow up on this, but it seems we've found the real culprit." Jordan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, a sense of relief washing over him for the first time since the incident began. The next day, the police visited Kevin's house. His parents were horrified to learn what their son had done, and Kevin, faced with the undeniable evidence of his own video, had no choice but to confess. He admitted to taking the wallet from Mrs. Lawson's porch while she was distracted, never expecting that his prank would escalate into such a serious situation. Word of Kevin's confession spread quickly through the neighborhood, just as the initial accusation had. The whispers that once questioned Jordan's character now shifted, filled with regret and apologies. Mrs. Lawson, upon hearing the news, felt a mixture of immense relief and deep remorse. She couldn't believe that she had doubted Jordan, the very boy who had gone out of his way to help her. Her guilt weighed heavily on her, and she knew she had to make things right. Jordan, meanwhile, felt a sense of vindication, but also exhaustion. The ordeal had taken so much out of him. His sense of security, his trust in others, and his belief in the goodness of his community. But as the truth finally came to light, he found solace in the support of those who had never doubted him. The evidence had cleared his name, and with it, the dark cloud that had hung over him began to dissipate. Little did Jordan know, this was not the end, but rather the beginning of a new chapter, one where the true value of integrity, community, and forgiveness would be put to the test in ways he never imagined. The revelation about Kevin's confession spread like wildfire through the neighborhood, bringing with it a mix of emotions. For Mrs. Lawson, there was a profound sense of guilt. She had trusted her instincts, but those instincts had led her to falsely accuse Jordan, the very young man who had selflessly helped her. The weight of her mistake bore down on her, and she knew she had to make things right. Mrs. Lawson decided to visit Jordan's family. She stood on their porch, her heart pounding with a mix of shame and determination. When Jordan's mother opened the door, Mrs. Lawson took a deep breath and spoke, her voice trembling. "I'm here to apologize," she said. "I was wrong, and I cannot express how deeply sorry I am for everything my suspicions put your family through." Jordan, standing behind his mother, listened as Mrs. Lawson continued. Her eyes glistened with tears as she looked directly at him. "Jordan, I misjudged you and I let my fear cloud my judgment. You didn't deserve any of this. You were kind to me, and I repaid that kindness with distrust. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me." Jordan felt a mix of emotions, hurt, relief, and compassion. He could see the genuine remorse in Mrs. Lawson's eyes, and despite everything, he understood that she had acted out of fear. Taking a deep breath, he nodded. "I forgive you, Mrs. Lawson," he said softly. "I know you were just scared. I appreciate you coming here to apologize." Mrs. Lawson's shoulders seemed to relax, the tension leaving her body. She smiled, though her eyes were still misty. "Thank you, Jordan," she whispered, her voice full of gratitude. Jordan's mother invited Mrs. Lawson inside, and they sat together, sharing a cup of tea. It was a small gesture, but it marked the beginning of a restored relationship. Word of Mrs. Lawson's visit and her heartfelt apology spread through the neighborhood, and soon, people began reaching out to Jordan and his family. Neighbors who had once cast suspicious glances now offered words of support and regret. The community, once divided by the incident, began to come together again, united in their desire to make amends. To show their support, Mr. Gomez organized a small gathering at the community park. It was a chance for everyone to celebrate Jordan's exoneration and the spirit of forgiveness that had emerged from such a difficult situation. As people gathered, there were hugs, apologies, and a sense of unity that had been missing for far too long. Jordan stood among his friends and neighbors, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in weeks. The ordeal had tested him in ways he never imagined, but it had also shown him the power of resilience, the importance of integrity, and the value of forgiveness. As the sun set on the gathering, Jordan knew that while the experience had been painful, it had ultimately brought his community closer together. The spirit of redemption and reconciliation had not only cleared his name, but also strengthened the bonds between neighbors. And for that, Jordan was grateful. In a gesture of gratitude and with a desire to turn a difficult situation into something positive, Mrs. Lawson decided to establish a small scholarship fund in Jordan's name. The scholarship was aimed at helping young people in the community who demonstrated kindness, integrity, and a willingness to help others, qualities that Jordan had exemplified throughout his ordeal. The news of the scholarship spread quickly, and it touched the hearts of everyone in the neighborhood. What had started as a moment of misunderstanding had now transformed into a story of hope, unity, and resilience. When Mrs. Lawson announced the scholarship at a community meeting, her voice wavered with emotion. She spoke of her mistake, her regret, and her desire to ensure something good came from all that had happened. "Jordan showed me what true integrity looks like," she said, her eyes glistening. "This scholarship is not just for him, but for every young person who chooses to do what is right, even when it's difficult." The audience listened in rapt attention, many nodding in agreement. It was clear that Mrs. Lawson's words came from the heart, and her sincerity struck a chord with everyone present. Jordan, standing with his family, was overwhelmed by the gesture. He had never expected anything like this to come out of the ordeal. The scholarship fund was not only a way to honor him, but also a means to inspire others in the community to act with kindness and integrity. His mother, tears of pride in her eyes, hugged him tightly as Mrs. Lawson spoke. She knew how much this recognition meant to her son, how it validated the person he had always strived to be, despite the hardships. The scholarship fund brought a renewed sense of unity to the community. People who had once been divided by suspicion and doubt now came together to contribute to the cause. Mr. Gomez, always one of Jordan's strongest supporters, was among the first to donate, his face beaming with pride. "This is what community is all about," he said as he handed Mrs. Lawson an envelope. "We lift each other up, especially in times of need." Others followed suit, each contribution a testament to the strength of the neighborhood and the bonds that held them together. For Jordan, the scholarship was more than just a financial resource for future students. It was a symbol of the power of forgiveness, resilience, and the impact that one person's actions could have on an entire community. He felt an immense sense of pride, not only for himself, but for everyone who had stood by him and for the community that had ultimately chosen unity over division. As the weeks passed, the scholarship fund grew, and the story of Jordan's kindness and Mrs. Lawson's redemption became a source of inspiration for everyone in the neighborhood. It was a reminder that even in the face of misunderstanding and hardship, compassion and integrity could prevail. The lasting impact of Jordan's actions had transformed not only his life, but also the lives of countless others, planting the seeds of hope for a better, more connected community. And for that, Jordan knew he was truly blessed. This story reminds us of the profound impact of kindness and the importance of reserving judgment. By standing firm in his values, Jordan not only cleared his name, but also inspired those around him to look beyond assumptions. If you enjoyed this story, please share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring tales on Life Story 999.